Go ahead and end the poll. Popular. Also, let me share results out here. So it's pretty close between.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Bloomington Rotary Club's weekly celebration of service. I'm Steve Wicks, and I'm honored to cover today for President Tracy Jovanovich. Today's quote is from Condoleezza Rice. The essence of America, that which really unites us, is not ethnicity or nationality or religion. It is an idea. And what an idea it is, that you can come from humble circumstances and do great things, that it doesn't matter where you came from, but where you're going. Laura Garrity has a reflection for us today.
Good afternoon. Tracy called me this weekend and asked if I would give the reflection. I'm happy to step in and help. Being a new member, this is my first reflection, so be kind. So I find myself continually fascinated by people, by our similarities and our uniqueness. I enjoy seeing how different people celebrate their passions and find common ground with others. I am too often caught staring, and I don't ever mean to be rude. I'm just intrigued and fascinated with humankind and what it means to be human. And so I want to share a poem with you by Maya Angelou. This poem highlights the diversity and underlying unity of humanity. It touches on the variations in appearance, personality, and experiences, but ultimately states that these differences are superficial compared to the fundamental similarities shared by all humans. Human family. I note the obvious differences in the human family. Some of us are serious, some thrive on comedy. Some declare their lives are lived as true profundity, and others claim they really live the real reality. The variety of our skin tones can confuse, bemuse, delight. Brown and pink and beige and purple, tan and blue and white. I've sailed upon the 7 seas and stopped in every land. I've seen the wonders of the world, not yet one common man. I know 10,000 women called Jane and Mary Jane, but I've not seen any two who really were the same. Mirror twins are different, although their features jibe, and lovers think quite different thoughts while lying side by side. We love and lose in China. We weep on England's moors, and laugh and moan in Guinea, and thrive on Spanish shores. We seek success in Finland, are born and die in Maine. In minor ways we differ. In major, we are the same. I note the obvious differences between each sort and type, but we are more alike, my friends, than we are unalike. We are more alike, my friends, than we are unalike. We are more alike, my friends, than we are unalike. Thank you.
Okay, introduction of guests. Glenda?
Good morning. We have so many guests that it's a page and a few more. So bear with me. We're excited that you're all here. First, Carol Ann Hostler. And if you would stand or wave, that's fine. She's waving in the back and Don Hostler is with her. Okay. He's over there, but they're here and we're glad you're both here. Joseph Capuro from Rotaract. Thank you. Sydney Zulik from the City Council. Caroline Clay with Andrea Murray. So nice to see an old neighbor. Grace Ballard. Dick McCaig has guests today. And Philip Mack, also a guest of Richard McCaig. Neva Reyes from Rotaract. Susan Frederick Gray. So glad to have you with us with the UU Church. And Yoon Wan from Rotaract. And Bonnie and Phyllis Perkins. I'm just going to introduce you together so you can wave together, guests of Bill Perkins. And thanks to all. If you're interested in Rotary, let us know.
Thanks, Glenda. Joy, do we have anyone online today?
Hey, Steve, and hi, everyone. Yes, we do have one guest, although I'm not sure if it is Britta or Jeff Getz, and they are Chloe's host family. And so I don't know if it's Britta or Jeff, so you'll just have to welcome both of them. Thanks.
Okay, we have 3 Rotary birthdays to celebrate. Tiffany Nichols' birthday was yesterday. Tim Jessen's birthday is today. And Art Omick has a birthday on the 11th. And anniversaries, Mary Getzi, 2 years. Tim Jessen, 12 years. Tracy Jovanovich, 2 years. And Sarah Laughlin, 16 years. Lots of announcements today. First of all, Sibling Cities Town Hall. Next one is 4 to 6 p.m. Sunday, and see Alan for details. Rotary Book Club meeting is at 7 p.m. tomorrow at Judy Schroeder's house. They'll be discussing Doug Bowder's book. If you're interested and want to learn more, see Judy or Sally Gaskell. This is the last week to purchase your tickets for the Rotary Toast, scheduled for November 1st. Natalie has information at the back. Congratulations to club members Forrest Gilmore and Amy Kendall on the amazing public launch of the Beacon Light the Way campaign last week. Over 100 people marched to light the way. Beacon has currently raised 55% of the funding that they need through grants and private donations. Monroe County branch of the NAACP, a club organizational member and led by Jim Sims, will host a community dialogue on October 13th. It's at 3 p.m. at the downtown branch of the Monroe County Public Library. And the theme will be 70 years post-Brown, looking to the past, transforming the future. If you have information, Jim is there in the back. He can provide more information. Big topic, Hurricane Helene disaster relief. So Rotary International and local Rotarians are responding as people of action. And our District 6580 Charities Fund is uniquely positioned to receive individual, club, and corporate donations. And these donations will be used to help with the recovery and rebuilding efforts that are now underway. And information regarding how to donate can be found on the District 6580 website. Will also be in the next issue of the Roundabout. And then Rotary International also has a disaster assistance fund, and you can find out more about that on the Rotary International website. And then finally, a sad note, Beth Thrasher, wife of former club president and club member Tim Thrasher, died on October 4th. So our program today, Connie, you want to introduce our guest speaker?
Thank you, President Steve. Once upon a time, a man named David Matlack spoke at a Bloomington Rotary meeting. He was a past veterinarian, a current educator, and professional storyteller. He had been raised in Richmond, Indiana, and had graduated from Earlham College. In 1984, he received his DVM from Purdue. He had transitioned to academia after 12 years of practice and was now a senior lecturer with IU Biology and an adjunct with the IU School of Medicine. As a professional storyteller, he had toured the country performing at art festivals, including the prestigious National Storytelling Festival Exchange Place, Atlanta Storytelling Festival, Florida Folk Festival, and the George West, Texas Storytelling Festival. He has received commissions from the Indiana Historical Society and Storytelling Arts of Indiana to develop and tell stories about Hoosier history. He is a member of the Bloomington Storytellers Guild. But the most important thing is that David Matlack is about to make me look really good, as people will soon be saying, boy, that Gus Chakalis' wife, she knows how to pick a Rotary speaker.
Thank you. Thank you. So people ask why I became a veterinarian, and I would humbly submit that it was obvious at quite a young age that I had a special gift with healing all of the Lord's creatures. And by way of demonstrating that, I want to tell you about my dog, Blue, best hunting dog in the county. Now, before I tell you what happened to Blue, I got to tell you about Miss Wilson. See, we lived in a cabin on top of the hill. At the bottom of the hill was a pond, and there on the far edge of the pond was the Wilson place. Well, one morning, Miss Wilson was out on her porch churning butter when she spied down at that pond a big 8-point buck. Now, she was not slow to seize this opportunity. She snuck back into her cabin, reached up over the mantle of the fireplace, and pulled down the musket. She took some gunpowder and buckshot, tamped that down in there, took some kitchen knives, tamped them down in there, and a piece of rope. Went back out on her porch and went to raise, aim, and fire when suddenly my mama decided she needed to call Miss Wilson about some lard for the morning biscuits. Now, I got to tell you, we didn't have no telephone, certainly didn't have no cell phone. I mean, my mama went out on the porch, oh, Miss Wilson. Well, of course, spooked that buck right out of his hooves. But that Miss Wilson, she was not only smart, but the best shot in the county. And she knowed exactly what that buck was going to do. He was going to run along the pond and curve through the woods to the left. So she took that musket barrel and she bent it over her knee in a fine swooping curve to the left, raised, aimed, and blam! Well, sure enough, that buckshot throwed that deer up in the air, pierced his heart, killed him instantly. That rope caught him by the hock, left him hanging from the oak tree by the pond. Them knives skinned and field dressed him. She was a good shot, wasn't she? All right, now here's the part about Blue. Now, simultaneously, coincidentally, and at the same time, my dog Blue was sleeping under the porch when his nose informed him of the presence of that deer down at the pond. Well, like a bolt of lightning, like a blue streak, he was blue. He went down the hill, found himself on the heels of that 8-point buck when something throwed it up in the air, left it dangling from the oak tree. Well, he was fast and he had some momentum going and he was staring up at his quarry hanging from that oak tree and, oh, he didn't even see it coming. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't blame the Wilsons. They're good people. And it was the plowing season, and it was customary to leave the plow out of an evening, though I don't know I'd have left it right in the trail like that. Well, like I said, he had some momentum going, staring at that deer, and oh, that dog just slammed right into one of them plow blades. Cut that dog in two. Now, I heard a yelp, and I come running down the hill, and there I seen my prize Blue laying in two halves. Well, I had already determined to be a veterinary, and this was my first chance to practice. I scooped up them two halves, ran up to Mama's porch, dumped him in a barrel of turpentine. Mama said it cured anything. Laid him out, ran to the stand of pine trees. I knew we was bleeding them for the pine tar, stickiest stuff around. Got a big old handful of that pine tar, slathered it all over them two halves, slapped him back together, took one of Daddy's t-shirts and wrapped him up. Now, after about a week, I seen that tail wagging, and I knowed it was time to change the dressing. Well, I go to unwrapping him, and oh my. Now, you got to understand, I had not yet been to veterinary school, just had a desire to help the Lord's creatures. Oh my. Well, the right side was fine, but it seems I put that left side on upside down. Now I had 2 legs down and 2 legs up. But you know what? Well, he was a better hunting dog after that. He'd get tired on these 2 legs, just flip on over and run on those 2. And he could bark at both ends. My dog Blue, best hunting dog in the county. Thank you. So I'm very proud to say that I won a blue ribbon at the Indiana State Fair in the Liars contest. I don't know if you picked up on that, but that was not a true story. I grew up in horse and pony 4-H and never got higher than 3rd place at the state fair. But yeah, the Liars contest, it's a great event. It's usually the first Friday of the state fair at the Pioneer Village. And I finally won my state fair blue ribbon. Okay, so yeah, I teach now at IU, and I recently moved out into the country, out in the new Unionville area. You might know that as a suburb of Unionville. Bustling Unionville grew so big they had to develop a suburb, New Unionville. Well, it didn't take long for word to get around that a veterinarian had moved into the neighborhood. And there's still a few farms out there, cattle farms, like a lot of gentleman farms, you know, few cattle, few hogs. But I'd get a knock on my door and it would be some old boy asking, "Doc, could you come look at my cow? Doc, could you look at my sow?" And I would have to tell him, "I'm sorry, folks, but I don't really work on farm animals anymore." Although I used to. Right out of vet school, I wanted to learn it all. So I took a job at what we call a mixed animal practice. Large animal, farm animals, where you go out on farm calls, and small animals, mostly puppy dogs, kitty cats, you do right there in the clinic. Well, Doc Odell down in Lagooty was advertising for a new young associate, mostly to go on the farm calls now that he'd had a total hip replacement, doctor's orders, stay in the clinic, work on puppy dogs and kitty cats. Well, I was eager to learn it all, so I took the job. Now, before I left, my mama, she said to me, she said, now, son, you're good book learned, but you ain't got no experience. You do everything exactly as Doc Odell tells you. Do you understand me, son? Yes, ma'am. Well, I hadn't been on the job but a few hours when the first farm call come in. It was Farmer Brown out at Utter Joy Dairy Farm. Joyce, our receptionist, took the call, gave me the directions. I headed out, met Farmer Brown, huge milking operation, rows and rows of milking parlors. Took me into the third one, down to a cow in the stanchion. Farmer Brown said, Doc, she just ain't right. She's off her feed, ain't making milk like she ought to. What do you think? I said, well, I don't know, but I know just what to do. I lifted up that tail, inserted a thermometer. Pop. Well, she had a fever. I figured a milk cow with a fever, it must be mastitis, infection in the udder, infection in the milk gland. So I gave her a big old shot of penicillin, gave the rest of the bottle, needle and syringes to Farmer Brown with instructions, get back to the clinic all proud to tell Doc Odell about my first farm call. He asked, I said, well, I diagnosed mastitis in a milk cow, gave her penicillin. He said, penicillin, huh? Well, son, did you strip out the milk gland? I said, well, no, sir. He said, son, you ain't got the sense you was born with. You got a milk cow with mastitis, you got to get that infection out of there. So here's what you do, son. You reach up under there and you squeeze and you squish, loosen it up. And then you tug and you pull, stripping out the milk gland. That's what we call that. Do you understand me, son? I said, yes, sir. Well, the next day, Farmer Brown called again, and he allowed how that first cow was fine despite my overlooking that part of it, but he had another one that was off. So I headed out. Farmer Brown met me. We walked past the rows of milking parlors to a big lean-to shed of a barn where his son was holding an enormous creature, holding it by a ring through its nose. Farmer Brown said, well, Doc, he just ain't right. What do you think? I said, well, I don't know, but I know what to do. Well, this one had a fever too. So I gave him a big shot of penicillin, and this time I knowed exactly what to do. I leaned up against the flank there. Oh, the hair's so soft right there. I leaned up under the flank. I reached under there, and I squeezed and I squished. And I tugged and I pulled. Ugh. And when I come to, I was in the next county. I got back to the clinic all beat up. Doc Odell asked me what happened. I told him. He said, son, you ain't got the sense you was born with. Don't you know you got a bull with a fever? Why, it could be Bang's disease, brucellosis, the undulant fever. You got to do a blood test. Here's what you do, son. You pull that tail straight up over the back. There'll be two big old veins on either side of the tailbone. You stick a needle in there, draw blood, send it to the state lab for Bang's disease. Do you understand me, son? I said, yes, sir. Well, the next day, we got a call from Happy Hooves Racing Stable. Joyce gave me the directions. I headed out. A trainer met me with a big, rambunctious 3-year-old race colt. Trainer said, I think he's got a bum wheel, Doc. What do you think? I said, I don't know. Better do a Bangs test. Trainer said, sounds pretty bad. I said, oh, it is. Hold him tight. I'll draw some blood. I stood directly behind that 3-year-old race colt. Inserted the needle. It looked like I was the ultimate Colts fan. I had not one, but two horseshoe shapes on my chest and a couple broken ribs. See, cows kick sideways, horses kick backwards. Got back to the clinic, wheezing from the broken ribs. Doc Odell asked me what happened. I told him. He said, son, you ain't got the sense you was born with. Don't you know you got a race colt with a bum wheel? You got to do a lameness exam. Now, Granted, it's hard to tell which foot it is, but here's what you do. You have that trainer trot the horse straight at you, and then about 10 feet off, you say, whoa. And if that colt's had any training at all, he'll stop on a dime. And putting that extra weight on the feet, he'll favor the one that's sore. You do a lameness exam. Do you understand me, son? I said, yes, sir. Well, the next day, we got a call from John Woolrich out at Sheer Delight Sheep Farm. Joyce gave me the directions. I headed out. He took me to a paddock with an enormous ram, a magnificent creature, massive head, big curled horns. And as we watched, that ram did the darndest thing. Throwed himself down in the grass and started retching and scratching like he was itching, just terrible. John asked me, what do you think, Doc? I said, I don't know. Maybe we better do a lameness exam. I liked John. He had a big old smile. He was almost laughing as he opened the gate to the paddock. He said, well, Doc, you go on in. I think I'll stay right here. So I step into the paddock. That ram popped up and he looked at me and he started trotting straight towards me. I thought, well, this is going swimmingly well. He started trotting faster. He broke into a gallop. But about 10 feet off, I said, whoa, John, this thing ain't training at all. Ugh. By the time I came to, I was up on the roof of John Woolrich's hay barn. I got back to the clinic. Doc Odell asked me what happened. Son, you ain't got the sense you was born with. You got sheep itching and scratching. Well, it could be the mange or it could be the lice. Either way, here's what you do. You take some clippers and you shear them down real short. And then you get a big old bucket of lime sulfur dip and sponge it all over them. Stains them bright yellow and stinks to high heaven, but the sheep don't mind, and it's the only thing that works. Do you understand me, son? I said, yes, sir. Well, the next day, we got a call from Madeleine La Flamboise, eccentric heiress to a lumberyard fortune. Had a big old barn full of fancy Arabian show horses. Joyce gave me the directions. I headed out. What a beautiful barn, mahogany stalls, brass nameplates, a fountain. It was beautiful. And nervous grooms running every which way. They said, oh, it's Alibaba, her prize show stallion, and he's sick. So they took me to Alibaba's stall. What a beautiful creature. Snow white, big liquid black eyes, snow white, long silky forelock, mane and tail. And then that horse did the darndest thing, throwed himself down and started rolling. Well, I knowed exactly what to do. Fetch him up and bring me the clippers. I commenced to shear off the long forelock, mane, tail. And Doc Odell was right about that lime sulfur dip. It stained yellow, bright yellow, almost a chartreuse green, and it did stink to high heaven. Just about the time I finished, coming down the barn aisle was Madeleine La Flamboise, a silver tray with 2 martinis. She was wearing pink pumps, pink high heels. Her hair was all done up, about 6 feet tall, Tammy Faye Baker eyelashes. And she said, oh, doctor, I'm so pleased to meet you. Oh, I do hope he's okay. She dropped that tray in the aisle. I said, ma'am, I believe that broken glass is a hazard in the aisle. She said, you are a hazard. And she sat in with some King's English that I just cannot repeat and I couldn't believe was coming from the mouth of the so-called lady. Well, I hightailed it out of there. By the time I got back to the clinic, she had already called Doc Odell and used some of that King's English on him. He said, son, you ain't got the sense you was born with. You got a horse rolling. Well, it's the colic. He's got a bellyache. He's probably got an impaction. So here's what you do. You get a gallon of mineral oil and you take a nasogastric tube and pass it down into his stomach, and then you pump that gallon of mineral oil into his stomach. It'll loosen up the impaction. Do you understand me, son? I said, yes, sir. Well, the next call, it was a chicken. Do you know the stomach of a chicken will not accommodate a gallon of mineral oil? But when I got back to the clinic all covered in oil and feathers, Doc Odell asked me what happened. And folks, you know what I heard. Son, you ain't got the sense you was born with. Thank you. Thank you. So that was actually based on a Jack story. I can't take credit for making up any of these stories. There's a million Jack stories out there. You know, Jack and the Beanstalk, Jack be nimble, Jack be quick. He's a famous quick trickster. So that was based on that. But you know, every pet and owner that walks through the door of a veterinary clinic is a story. And, you know, some are quite rewarding and heartwarming. Some are quite sad, but some are just plain creepy, like this one. And October is a good time to tell some creepy stories, right? Okay, so I will never forget some of our favorite clients, the Dedemeyers. Mrs. Dedemeyer was a tiny, petite little 80-year-old woman. Mr. Dedemeyer was huge. And they had a tiny little toy poodle named Killam. And Mr. Dedemeyer adored that little dog. They went everywhere together. He had quite a paunch, and he would just cup his hand, and little Killam would ride there, and they would go everywhere together, including into the clinic for the slightest little thing, or just a nail trim, or just to come in to chat. And that was fine because we adored the Dedemeyers and loved little Killam. Well, one day, Mr. Dedemeyer died. Well, a few days later, Mrs. Dedemeyer called the clinic and told us that Killam had died in her sleep of a broken heart, she said. Well, not long after that, the Dedemeyer's son up in New York called the clinic, and he explained that he and his siblings had chipped in and bought their mother a new dog now that she was alone. And they were flying the dog down to Orlando, and the Dedemeyer's pastor had agreed to take her to the airport to pick up the dog. And he was calling to make an appointment for when they returned so we could check him out, make sure he traveled okay, and to get him on our records. All right, well, the day of the Dedemeyer appointment arrived, and she pulled in their big white Lincoln Continental. The door opened, and in came bounding this enormous attack-trained Doberman Pinscher. Right? They had bought her this dog not only for companionship, but as a guardian now that she was living alone. And he would be a formidable watchdog. He was huge. His shoulders were up to my hips, massive head, spiked collar. He would be wonderful as a guardian. All right. Now, if he liked you, he was a total sweetheart. All right. And she ended up naming him Sweetums. He had some big, long German name, but she called him Sweetums. And the two of them got along famously. Well, one day we had finished all our appointments, sent all the surgeries home, and we were all up front shooting the breeze with Joyce, our receptionist. She was filing records. And we heard the squealing of tires, and we looked and saw the Dedemeyer's white Continental come screeching to a halt. Mrs. Dedemeyer jumps out around the back over to the passenger side of the back seat. I don't know how she did it. This 80-year-old woman scooped up that 90-pound Doberman Pinscher. I met her at the door. I just held the door open, my mouth agape. And then she plopped him down on the floor. She said, "Oh, doctor, do something. I just got home from the grocery and I found him like this." And Sweetums, he was choking on something foam coming out of his mouth and his nose, and his gums were turning blue. And if he was turning blue, I knew I had less than 5 minutes to act. I explained, I think he's choking on something. We're going to have to take him in the back. We might have to sedate him if he begins thrashing. Said, oh, doctor, do whatever you need to do. I'm going home to put the groceries away. The ice cream is melting. Or we often see this in a critical state of emergency. People just can't deal with it, so they leave. So she goes on home. It took 3 of us to scoop that 90-pound dog up. We take him back to the treatment table, prop him up, and he did indeed start thrashing for want of oxygen. So I drew up a big dose of barbiturate. Elena, she held off the big vein. I pushed it in, and he nodded off. And then Elena held up that massive head by the upper jaw. I grabbed the lower jaw and the tongue, and I fixed my light. All of the staff was gathered around waiting to see what would happen. As soon as I saw what that dog was choking on, I said, Joyce, get on the phone. Call the sheriff. Get him over to the Dedemeyer place now. Now, it just so happens that a sheriff's deputy was on patrol near the Dedemeyer's house, and he met her in their driveway. They went inside, and she showed him where she found Sweetums. And then they saw drops of blood from the living room, down the hallway, into the master bedroom, to a closet. Freeze! And there on the floor of that closet, clutching a bleeding hand, was a mugger and a robber. You see, what I pulled out of that dog's throat was 2 fingers. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Did that really happen? No, but it would have been really cool. That's an urban legend called the choking Doberman. Yeah. Okay, so I think I'll just open it to any questions or comments that you might have. And remember, we have to allow for the microphone to come to questions so that our Zoom folks can hear.
David, that was just fabulous, and you made me look so good. And I bet a lot of people are wondering this question. Do you miss veterinarian medicine?
I miss certain things, like some of the tinkering that we do, because people don't have, well, there is pet insurance, but it's pretty bogus, actually. And back when I was practicing, there was no pet insurance. So we have to work within people's budgets. And so we're often making things, like making our own splints and things like that. I miss some of the surgeries, and I do miss some of the client and pet relationships. But for that very same reason, because there's no insurance, what I don't miss is the heartbreak of having all this training, but we can't do what needs to be done because the people can't afford it. It's just heartbreaking. Now, in the early years, my wife's a veterinarian too, we would just do it. We would take the dog to the back and just do whatever needed done. All right, but then the lab bills come in, the drug bills come in, and your biggest bill is your staff. And when you do that, you can't meet those bills. And so you have to draw the line. And so it's really heartbreaking. The other thing I don't miss is no more emergency calls. That killed me. Emergency clinics were just popping up in big cities, but we were practicing in pretty rural Florida, and there was no emergency clinic. And it gets to the point where the phone rings and you just burst out crying because you're just crawling back into bed after the last one, and the phone rings again. Yeah, and you also get rather jaded doing some emergency calls if you take them from strangers, people that are not clients at your practice. When a stranger at 2 in.the morning with a parvovirus case, I don't know if you're familiar, it is easily preventable with vaccines, but a highly contagious virus, and it can quickly become fatal. So a stranger with a puppy with parvo, when they say, "Doc, do whatever you need to do," that's actually code for, because we have no intention of paying you anyway. You know, and when it's a 2 in.the morning, you get jaded. And yeah, so after 7 years of practice, I was already kind of burning out, and I also kind of felt that I needed to do some type of service. You know, I had not done military service, but I wanted to do service. So I actually took a year off to teach high school science. And that was truly community service. Originally, it was to be anatomy and physiology, which I could walk in and do cold because we had so much of that at vet school. At the last minute, they said, well, she actually decided not to retire. Can you teach earth space science? You know, astronomy, geology. I'm like, well, actually, my mother taught that. I'll just get her files. But that was for 9th graders, and 9th graders just aren't ready to be in high school yet, I don't think. And it was rough. I broke out in shingles. I was so stressed. But that led to teaching anatomy and physiology at a community college at night. And I love that. You know, non-traditional students, they're all working. Most of them are parents. And they've just decided, I hate my factory job. I want to go into nursing. And every nurse has to take anatomy and physiology. So community colleges have tons of offerings in that. And I absolutely love that, and kind of learned that college teaching was my niche, my gift. I did go back to practice, and then I even took a year off and was an entire year as a professional storyteller. That was difficult. Florida is a really big state, you know, and I would get all these bookings for schools, but the school would be 3 or 4 hours away, you know. But I did get some really good grants from the state of Florida. And it was really fun, but it was really difficult. And at the time we had 3 small children, and, you know, being on the road that much was hard. So, but yeah, we just had our 40th class reunion of my vet school class up at Purdue. And I was kind of wistful about parts of practice. I did kind of miss some parts, but an amazing number of my class did not stay in practice like me. Some went on to become lawyers. A lot of them went into regulatory veterinary medicine, which is like food inspection. And there are some perks to working for the federal government. You know, no emergency call, regular hours, and good benefits. But I was amazed at how many did not stick with practice. It's a very high burnout situation. Yeah.
I'm just going to go ahead and ask a question real quick.
Okay.
So while you tell lies wonderfully, do you have any true stories about like a real big challenge in terms of an animal you saved or took care of?
I do have a true story. I don't know that we have time for it. About a true story about what really was my first dog and really was a reason I went into veterinary medicine. The historical stories that I had commissions for are true stories. And yeah, sometimes I'll tell. I did a lot of work on Arabian horse breeding farms and have some really great inappropriate about horse breeding. Yeah, but what is our time frame here? We got 5 minutes. Okay. All right. So I kind of get choked up with this story. Usually not at the end. I don't know why at the beginning, but what truly was my first dog was Ernie. And the phone rang one day in March, and my father answered the phone, and it was Mary McKinney. She was my horseback riding instructor, and she told us to come on out. She had something for us. Well, we couldn't imagine what. I was hoping it would be a pony, you know, but Dad piled us into the station wagons and we headed out. And she had a magical little place, and she was this little elfin woman, and she met us in the barn, and she explained that he showed up last week. It took me this long to catch him. And she opened the stall door, and she had left him on a long lead rope for horses, like a really long leash. And she began pulling, and this head came out, and she was pulling so hard that all of the abundant skin was pushed down over his nose, but we could make out the unmistakable long, long ears of a basset hound. And I had been dreaming of a basset hound, and these little short legs come out, but he's so terrified. She's pulling him the whole time. And it was like, Daddy, Daddy, can we please? And of course, you know, what was he going to say? So we pile him in the back of the station wagon and we drive on home. My mother was not with us. All right, so now there's going to be some explaining to do. I left that to my dad. All right. Well, we don't know what happened to Ernie, but for 7 years, I was the only human being that could touch him. He was so terrified. He was just so terrified. Well, as that summer progressed, what had been a beautiful tricolor coat, he began losing hair and these kind of red oozing splotches all over his body. I caught him and we took him into Doc Siebert, and he said it was demodectic mange, the type that was at that time incurable. All right, well, Mary McKinney had told me about a miracle concoction for anything on the horses: sublime sulfur and bacon grease. All right, so I went to Hook's drugstore, I got a jar of sublime sulfur, went to my mother's rendering can, got some bacon grease, and began slathering it all over Ernie. And it seemed like it was working, so I would slather it on even thicker. All right, well then one clear, crisp fall day, my mother did her Saturday morning chores. She shook out the rugs and she laid them out on the sidewalk. Freshening is what she called it. And then we went off to Earlham to watch one of my father's soccer games. He was the soccer coach. Well, when we got back, Mother found the rugs to not be so fresh. What with mats of hair and bacon grease and sublime sulfur. Oh, that doggone dog. And as we often see with that type of mange, then he also developed ear infections. And I don't know if you've ever left a zucchini in the crisper for about 3 months and it liquefies and stinks to high heaven. That was the kind of infection that he developed in his ears. And Doc Siebert said this too is it's resistant to every known antibiotic, but do your best. All right. Well, he slept out in the garage, but on bitter cold nights, I would bring him into the house. And as his skin would start warming up, it would start itching. And he would start rubbing all over the furniture, and that zucchini slime from his ears and the bacon grease all over the furniture. My mother would come down the next morning, that doggone dog. That Christmas, I bought him a little pork chop toy. It was kind of a sickly salmon red. And Mother had even broken down and bought him a stocking. All right, so I put the pork chop toy in the stocking. All of us kids, there were tons of cousins there. We opened our presents, and I was like, I'm going to go get Ernie for his pork chop toy. All right, so I had to carry him up the stairs because he was so terrified. He could hear there were people up there. But I plopped him down, and he was so terrified by all of these strangers, he just spun around and bolted. And that thick hook of a basset tail caught a string of lights on the Christmas tree and toppled the tree over. That doggone dog. Well, the years progressed, and each summer the ears and the skin would get worse. And the time came for me to go off to vet school. And Ernie was not college material. He would have to stay home. And at this point, because my mother had been feeding him for all those years, he did let her touch him. And she promised that she would medicate him. And I knew that she would. Then one February up in vet school, I got a Valentine's Day card from home. And it was simply signed, "Love, Ernie." I knew what that meant. I knew that meant that Ernie had passed away. And that was my mother's way of telling me, as gently as she could. All right, we rarely talked about it. And it was the ear infection. It had eroded into his brain. And when I would come home for previous breaks, I could see from the empty tubes that Mother had been medicating him as she promised, but I couldn't help but feel guilty and wonder, had I abandoned Ernie? Had Mother come to love Ernie? Had he been loved? Well, then after graduation, when I got my job, I stopped by home one last time to get some things I might need in my life as a bachelor. And there in utility room was Ernie's dog dish. And in that dish was that pork chop toy. And I thoughtlessly grabbed the things and I ran upstairs to say goodbye, and Mother peered in the dish and I said, "I think I'll get a new dog now." And Mother nodded, but she slyly reached into that bowl and she clasped that pork chop toy and clasped it to her breast. She said, "I think this should stay here." Thank you.
Thank you very much. I can't help but think that Mark Twain would really appreciate your storytelling. Lots of acknowledgements for today's meeting. First in the back, Natalie Blaze, our executive assistant. We had a tag team for greeting today. Charlotte Zitlow, Ron Barnes, and Art Omick. Introductions, Glenda Murray introduced our guests and Connie Shakalis introduced our speaker. Joy Harder was our Zoom host. Lori Garrity, pinch hitting, did our reflection. Elizabeth Thompson is our reporter this month. Michael Shermis, our camera mic operator. And Tyler Martin Nichols, our Zoom and audio producer. Our next meeting will be here in the Frangipani Room on the 15th. Our speaker will be Steve Miller, who will discuss veterans and veterans affairs. And Tyler, if you can put up the graphic for the four-way test. And those stand if you're able, please. Of the things we think, say, or do, first, is it the truth? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, will it build goodwill and better friendships? Fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned? And fifth, is it fun?